Host Bonniejean and Nick here today. I know they have done fantastic research already about rural schools on many different levels. So I'm really happy to hear about the work that the STARS Lab is doing. I think we'll have time for the bulk of it will be a presentation, but then of course, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to add them to the chat as we go along. So Nick and Bonniejean, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us today. I am Bonniejean Zitske. I'm the Associate Director of STAR Lab, which is a research center located within the Division of Enrollment Management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And later in the presentation, I will get more into what STAR Lab is and what we do. I'll have Nick introduce himself next.
And I'm Nick Hillman. I'm a professor in the School of Education at UW-Madison. As Bonniejean said, I direct the lab. Geography of opportunity, rural college access issues are part of my research agenda. This is cutting across so many interests of ours. And so I'm just really happy and thrilled to be invited to this group to share what we've been learning along the way, but also to learn from you as well. I'll be driving the slides. So Bonniejean, you just tell me when to put them up and I will.
Great. Why don't you put those up? I am also, just full transparency, doing this from my phone in a hotel room. I'm at ACPA in Chicago, which is fantastic. There's a lot of discussion around this topic of rural students and access. So if my phone flips over or if something happens, I don't even know. There are many things I can't see right now, but it looks like the slides are being, and okay, so perfect. So our agenda for today is Nick is going to give you an overview of this project called Mapping Rural Colleges. And included in that overview will be a demonstration of the tool. And then once we come out of that, we'll talk a little bit more about STAR Lab, what we are, what we do, and how this project has really been a catalyst for other research projects, discussions, things on this issue. Kind of, Nick said this issue cuts across a lot of the different work that we do. I should have said at the beginning, STAR Lab stands for Student Success Through Applied Research. So everything we do is with the intention of fostering student success in higher education, using research to do so. So Nick, I will hand it over to you and you can take it away.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So I feel aware, very self-aware of being in a group of folks who are doing so much work on the ground with rural communities, and many of you, I'm assuming, are also from rural places, shapes your identity. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my own experience growing up in a place that I would say is rural, but just to kind of open it up like that, because I feel like anything rural is just sort of exciting today, and you get, I think, a lot of people interested in this topic, and maybe to varying degrees of depth. And so I just wanted to be sure that in this intro slide, I also share a little bit about myself. But I think what we want to be sure to have is like at least 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes at the end for like full open discussion. But please do along the way just stop. But here is, if I can get this to work here, we go. Oh no. There we go. Okay, so a little bit about this backstory, this personal backstory, but how it connects to inform my research agenda, and then subsequently how it's informed our collective work in the lab. Several years ago, I was doing some work on finance of higher ed, like state funding models, and basically saying, like, hearing a lot of people in this space say, well, students just need to like make better choices about where they go to college. If they just had better information, maybe they would match to a better school. I think there's some truth to this, but it did not reflect any of my lived experience as a student, any of my family's experience of how they thought about college. I'm the first in my family to go to college. Grew up in Michiana, southern Michigan, a little town called Union, just on the other side of the line of Indiana. And during the Great Recession, you know, that whole region up there, Elkhart, Indiana, if anybody's familiar, had like 25% unemployment rate. Economists would say that's when people would go back to school because the opportunity costs are low, and like none of this made sense to me in my lived experience. And nobody in my family went back to school. Nobody went back to college, and for very good reasons. Students stay close to home. There isn't a college nearby, not within 45 minutes driving from where I grew up, and that alone is a huge barrier for access. And it's sort of like hiding in plain sight. You could give somebody as much information all day long about a place hundreds of miles away, but what good is that if they don't have the resources to then act on it? And maybe they shouldn't do that. Maybe it's really good for them to stay close to home for community ties and so on. It motivated a lot of my research. And so, as sort of a love letter to this, I wrote some articles that got placed in really good academic journals. And I'm so happy about these studies because they have a shelf life. And in fact, Bonniejean, just today, somebody sent me an email saying that they saw something at the at ACPA about education deserts. That's kind of a way that I framed some of the early work in this space. We can talk about that as well. But the point here is that students stay close to home. I don't think we in research and policy conversations give that enough credit. And especially in the data space, we don't really explore this well enough. And so we also know that colleges just aren't evenly located across the country. And the local contexts matter greatly when people are choosing where to go, whether to go, and what they study and what's available to them. So that backdrop, I started doing this work in 2014 and have kept it as a central part of my agenda for years. And just seeing in this space how it intersects with rurality. I think the issues that I just laid out are also true in urban places all over the country, but especially true in rural places. And at the same time, there's just a growing interest in all things rural. And so I'm aware of that and also want to, have some degree of credibility with this group to also say like, this is important to me personally. On the data side, on the research side of the house, and forgive me, I don't have a good sense of where everybody's at with their data sort of familiarity, but the US Department of Education's iPads is sort of the central place to find data on where colleges are located. It's going to miss a lot of information. And because of that, we have used some other data sources to capture branch campuses, satellite locations, all of these sort of other places other than the main campus that, especially in rural places, can be really important for college access and we know almost nothing about. And so anyhow, all this is kind of coming together, and Ascendium had reached out with when they were developing their rural strategy and asked if we would be interested in building out some of these ideas. And so we did over a couple of years. And what I'll share is a sort of the culmination of that work. This is the mapping tool that, like I said, Ascendium helped support us develop. This mapping tool, I'm going to do a demonstration. And I will put into the chat, unless maybe, I don't know, Virginia, would you be able to do that for us? I've just been bad at multitasking sometimes, or I can, either way. But
Got it.
okay, thank you. We have a report. It's, I don't know, several pages that goes in depth into some of our findings. But we have this mapping tool that might be interesting, helpful for you all in your work that overlays a lot of information. It overlays where people live using census data, population data. It overlays these colleges and their sort of branch campus locations. It also overlays high schools. It overlays demographic and economic information about these places with the idea of just getting fuller context around rural places, who lives there, what kind of college options are there. And this tool could be useful in a lot of different ways. And Bonniejean will kind of come back to that at the end. And we're very curious to hear if and how this is potentially useful in your own work. But I'd like to walk through this tool briefly, and I'll show you a place. You probably will go to your place that you're most familiar with, and you'll probably see stuff that doesn't really jive with your experience, where you might say, hey, this place isn't as rural as I thought, or this is more rural than it reflects, or this institution is or isn't there. There's a lot of nuance here that we just sometimes miss. And at the same time, I think we get a lot of stuff right in the tool. So it, at the very least, is a resource that we can explore further, develop further, and so on. But let me kind of see if I can do this. I'm going to exit the slideshow, open up a map, or the mapping tool, and I don't know if Bonniejean, can you see this, the map?
Yes. Yep. I can see it.
Good. Okay. And so, and Virginia, were you able to share the map link in the chat?
Yes, it's in the chat.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you. So, so I feel like it's kind of a whirlwind here. So forgive me if I'm missing any steps, but I think for folks who are on the call, if you have that link, go to the map, start exploring. There's some things I want to walk through on this tool that just might not be super intuitive. And so as I walk through them, they might be helpful as you explore the tool on your own. So I'm going to zoom in to Michiana, the border of Michigan and Indiana, what I would call a rural place. We lived out in the woods and rode a bus for 35 minutes to get to school. Growing up, we could all tell our stories about our homes. But this place, when I mapped this data out, I would expect that this place would be very rural. Darkest blue areas are the most rural places. And I'm going to discuss how we are measuring rurality here. But the darkest blue are the most rural, and the lightest blue are the least rural. And so, right away, you're getting oriented to this mapping tool through those 4 color codes. But you might be wondering, what in the world are these sort of weird looking boundaries within a state? So if anybody's from southwestern Michigan, that's highlighted right here, that's not a county. It goes over both Michigan and Indiana state lines. This is called a commuting zone. The U.S. Department of Agriculture creates these based off of census data and based off of what's called journey to work information. So they take home addresses, work addresses, and they statistically figure out how far do people commute to work. And after you look at that for millions of people, you can kind of start to cluster counties together into what are called commuting zones. Folks familiar with Raj Chetty and the Opportunity Insights team out of Harvard, they've been doing a lot of research on upward mobility. They're the group that has done those mobility scorecards for colleges, for example. They use the same exact information, these commuting zones, these sort of local places, local-ish places that just share a common economy, a common sort of social environment. So with that framing in mind, you can see on this map, I'm going to zoom in a little further, Michiana, and you can go over to the layers over here on the map, the toggle layers option, and you could add the county boundaries. And so now you can start to see the different counties that are located in that particular commuting zone. And in this particular case, this Michiana area, I mean, there's probably 10 different counties here. My family, we would stay basically in one of these counties. So we wouldn't, when we travel, I guess, to the store, we might cross over the state line, cross over the counties. But for the most part, I mean, these are very big regions and very big swaths of geography. But they do share some common characteristics. And over on the left-hand side, you can see what counties are included in that particular commuting zone. You can see Elkhart County, Indiana, for example, and so forth. You can then click on these and see sort of how many people live in this commuting zone, what proportion of people live in non-metropolitan, or as we'll say, rural counties. There are some issues with how we think about that we can discuss, but 8% of the million people live in rural places. And then it shows how many people of different age groups live there. You can see educational attainment levels, the racial and ethnic sort of profile of people who live in these places, and then some economic indicators around, like, say, poverty, income, and unemployment rates, and so forth. And these are all based off of census data for 2021, I believe. But perhaps if you're writing a grant proposal, if you're looking for partners, or you're looking for more information about a region, maybe this is information that could be useful. You can even go and toggle on your high school locations as well and see what high schools are in the area. So if we find Constantine, there we go, Constantine High School right there. This is where I lived in Southern Michigan. And you can then see, for example, you kind of start to squint and look around this dot right here. There are very few colleges even nearby, especially when we start to sort of limit these colleges. That's what the orange and sort of red dots are. And so you can see, we can turn the high schools back off. And these are now where the colleges are located. They're usually located around population centers, but we might want to say we're only interested in the main campus. So now all these branch campuses disappear. we're only interested in the main campus, and maybe we're only interested in public institutions for the time being because you have of affordability, for example. And so now all of a sudden you have Glen Oaks Community College, and then you've got Indiana University South Bend are pretty much the only two public institutions. I guess there's this one way up here, Kellogg Community College, that are the only public options for this group, this geographic region where over 1 million people live. And so we start to plot this out over the country, and we can start to see some patterns of where colleges are located relative to who lives in these places. And we see some pretty stark inequalities around the country, and some maybe potentially promising policy ideas of how would you go about expanding college access in places that maybe don't have a lot of colleges nearby. And so with that, I will stop sharing. We can always come back to this. I'll go back to the PowerPoint, and I'll briefly share a couple of takeaways and hand it back over to Bonniejean. Bonniejean, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Excellent. Okay. So that was a very whirlwind tour of the mapping tool. But what did we learn from this tool? We had, we collected all this data, we mapped it all out, and that's not enough for researchers. We want to also analyze that data and figure out what kind of patterns did we see here. Can we learn anything from what we saw in the data? And there's so much stuff here that we're going to just boil this down to two things. First of all, this idea of where colleges are located, it's fundamental to how we understand college access. And if I start looking at the research, there's almost nothing out there about this information. We don't really know where colleges are located, know enough about it, I should say, especially these branch campuses and alternative locations. At the same time, operationalizing what we mean by rural, how do we actually measure that? How do we actually put that into practice for a study? We had to make some decisions. And I think for the Q&A, we might want to discuss that. But I kept reading stuff about how rural colleges were struggling with enrollments, but I've never seen any evidence to that. And so this analysis helped us put some evidence behind that kind of a claim. And sure enough, they were struggling with enrollments, but we want to see the facts. And so a couple key findings: rural located colleges, they've seen faster enrollment declines than non-rural located colleges. However, if you're a doctoral university located in a rural place, that's not true. It's largely rural community colleges, rural broad access colleges are really the ones that are experiencing these trends more so than any other institutions. And so this, in the report, we've got some charts that kind of show here on the top left are public community colleges. And it shows since 2005, rural are the dark blue lines, and sort of the gray line is sort of non-rural. And this just shows the percentage change of enrollment over time. And you can see leading up to the Great Recession, students flooded into community colleges, whether they're rural or not rural, they flooded into community colleges at almost the exact same rate. But then after the Great Recession sort of subsided, students attending rural located colleges, those enrollments just plummeted. And so they plummeted faster than in non-rural places. That's, I think, pretty interesting, especially if anybody on this call is working with places that have public community colleges. Dual enrollment are big time programs and really important for these exact schools. And so there's something really important going on here, a story that should be told, I think. In the top right, though, public, more like broad access colleges, we don't see the same pattern. So really this decline in rural enrollment is largely a community college phenomenon. And on the bottom left, we see some nonprofit institutions. That's the same. That's actually true too. The nonprofits located in rural places are seeing enrollment declines faster than non-rural places, and for-profits as well. But those are pretty small ends, and that's why you see a pretty big percentage point change there. But anyhow, the point is that rural located colleges have indeed seen faster enrollment declines, especially in the community college sector. But then, like I said earlier, so locating colleges is a lot harder than it seems. Branch campuses in particular are really interesting, and they can be really important for rural places. But there's also some really interesting stuff going on around correctional facilities in rural places. If there are accredited educational program offerings happening in prisons, they are also likely to be in rural places, and there could be some implications there that I think go underexplored. And like I said, K through 12 dual enrollment programs are really important, especially in rural places. And so in the report, that's another one of our findings. We kind of array our data by rural and non-rural, like this table shows, and we can say, well, there are here in the very first data point you'll see is 981. There are 981 main locations of colleges in rural places. But there are 1,000 branch campuses in rural places. So there are more branch campuses in rural places than there are main institutions. And you can also see, for example, just to highlight one of them, correctional facilities, pretty interesting. 58 correctional facilities have education programs in rural places. And so there's just, something going on. I'm not so sure if that's super relevant to this group, maybe it is, but for some particular groups, it's really important to get that information out there. And again, K-12 settings are especially important in rural places. And so, Bonniejean, I am off the hot seat. You get it now.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And I'm also trying to, there is a question, Nick, wondering if the map includes charter schools or just the traditional high school district schools. And I believe that when we added the high schools, we added public schools, right? It's just public schools. So if the charter school is a public school, it would be included on the map. Is that right, Nick?
That's right. Public charters would be included. If there's a specific school, you can also search for it, and I'd be happy in the Q&A to show how to do that.
Great. So next, I'm going to talk about STAR Lab, what we do, how this fits into our portfolio, and some of the offshoots of this project, and they go kind of in all different directions. So you can move to the next slide, Nick, where we talk about STAR Lab. I've already mentioned it's a research center. It's unique because it's located in an administrative home, in a practitioner home, rather than an academic home. So our partners and colleagues that we work with every day are folks who work in recruitment and admissions and financial aid in the registrar's office. Our mission is to produce and also elevate research that reduces barriers, improves equity, and supports student success in higher education. And we do this through an intentional partnership, I should say partnerships, plural, because we have a lot of different partnerships with practitioners and policymakers in the field. So I think many of you are in the K-12 setting and you may be familiar with research practice partnerships. We are doing our best, and sometimes we're wildly successful, and other times we might need to kind of hone our skills of being a research practice partnership in higher education, which is a pretty cool thing to be, because I think we're one of the first. You can move on. There we go. I'm going to tell you to move on. I'm looking at my computer and the phone, and anyway, we're getting through it. Okay. So as a research practice partnership within the Division of Enrollment Management, we focus, we kind of have these two groups of projects that we work on: externally funded projects or sponsored programs, and then internal partnership projects. So some of our externally funded projects include a teacher pledge evaluation. So UW-Madison has a loan forgiveness program within the School of Education called the Teacher Pledge. And for teacher education students who go through this program and take the pledge, if they teach 3 to 4 years in the state of Wisconsin following graduation, their loans are forgiven. We have a new project that's funded by the Sloan Foundation that we call the Indigenous Student Database, and we're going through and doing an inventory of all the scholarship and financial aid programs that support Indigenous students at the institutional, the programs being at the institutional, state, and federal level, taking all of that data, putting it into a data set for researchers, but then also in a functional website for students, for Indigenous students during their high school years, to figure out what opportunities are out there for them. We are also working on a project kind of combining this tool that you just saw with the idea of return on investment for higher education. So there's a lot of talk right now about the value of higher education and what's that return on investment for each institution. And the federal government has some metrics that they've issued. And we think that those metrics aren't static, or there's additional context that you can provide to those metrics, including geography. So that's something that we're working on. And then looking at state funding models for supporting student success. And so how institutions are funded through their state funding models and how those are done equitably or inequitably and how that might contribute to student success. Some of our internal partnership projects include looking at financial aid programs, looking at different financial aid programs, promise programs. Wisconsin has Bucky's Tuition Promise and Bucky's Pell Pathway, which are these promise programs. And actually, STAR Lab was really involved at the initiation of those projects. And so determining how successful they have been. The first promise program that UW-Madison implemented is 5 years old. And so we have enough data now to be able to look back and see how successful that program has been. Test optional evaluation is a big topic right now. And again, for those of you who work in high schools, I know this is top of mind. It's confusing for families, for students to know if they need to take a test, if they need to submit test scores. So Nick has done some really great evaluation looking at the state of Wisconsin and UW-Madison, looking at UW-Madison, I should say, to see how influential those test scores are in student success. We also look at our FAFSA completion rates. This year has been a little different and kind of a mess in terms of FAFSA, which several of you are probably also familiar with. But in the past, looking at like how many students in our state are completing the FAFSA. And then rural partnership work, which we have, some of you might be familiar with the STARS network, which is a group of colleges around the country who are focused on recruiting rural students. And one of those people focused on this work is in UW-Madison. You can move on to the next slide, Nick. So here are I'm going to kind of overlap some of the projects that I just mentioned, but when we look at this Mapping Rural Colleges tool, there are a couple things that come out. First of all, is the importance of this information and how it can be used to inform other research projects. And the other thing is the actual functionality of a tool and the actual functionality, like how this works, because Nick, I don't think you showed how you can download the data. So this is one thing that you can play with when you go in. You can download the entire data set. It's right there. There are some links. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and you can just go in and you can download the entire data set and you can play with it and try to find what you want to find with it. And so having a tool that's accessible to users who are interested in this work and also researchers who are interested in using the data for either to expand on that work or to bring in multiple data sets for different work. This is pretty cool. And so this has informed the Indigenous Student Database project. That's like based on kind of that project, gathering a huge data set, putting it in a framework that can be used by researchers, but also by these students. And it's a great idea. I can say that I wasn't there when Nick did this project, so I can really brag about this project, and it's not like I'm bragging about myself. It's the work that the lab did before I arrived. So again, that first bullet point, the ROI project that we're doing that's currently funded by the Gates Foundation, and contextualizing that return on investment and what it means depending on your geographic location. That is a direct expansion of the work that you just saw from the Mapping Rural Colleges. The Indigenous Student Database builds on it. So researchers, Nick just forwarded a paper today, and I can't remember who the author is, but it was about career and technical education. And the author of this article cited this work because if you looked at iPads, an institution might not be identified as rural, but if you go into this map, you can see the branch locations associated with that institution, and they are rural. They are located in rural areas. So it's neat to see that this work is informing other things that researchers are doing. We formed we don't really have a partnership with this group, but we've had conversations with this group, and I think our work has helped inform what they're doing in Loyola. There's a group that really focuses on prison education programs, and they found this data set really helpful. And this is a case in which the researchers or the folks at the center downloaded the full data set, where they could see if institutions that are located in correctional facilities have current accreditation. So she is using two different data sets to compare to ensure that the data that we have displayed is accurate. And so her work can help inform this tool as well and what we're displaying. But that was really cool. She saw it and she said, oh, I can use this to like double check to make sure that all of these institutions are up to date on their accreditation. County health rankings and roadmaps is a project that's funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at UW-Madison and their School of Medicine and Public Health. And they look at the different civic infrastructure in different areas in different counties that will lead to folks' success, like different schooling, education, healthcare, access to all of these things. And one of the things that they want to do is use our tool to look at the rural areas specifically to see what kind of civic infrastructure is there or lacking. And what's interesting is so essentially they're kind of using this map as a way to define rurality. And that's something that I think people grasp for, right? Just in general and in research, especially, how do you define a rural area? And so this is one way. This tool offers one way to define it, and it's clear in how it's defined. Nick walked through that. And I think as long as you're clear with the definitions, it's nice to have. So I think that that's why people are so interested in it. And then the STARS network, actually, I mentioned them earlier, the group of folks at different institutions that are focused on recruiting students from rural areas. They're the ones who said, hey, can we maybe add high schools into this tool? Because that would be really helpful. So we were able to do that. We found the data set for public high schools, and we were able to incorporate it. And it's just kind of neat to see how a tool can be, as long as it's created in a flexible and accessible way, it can respond to these additional needs that come out from it, and it can be even made more useful. So that was a quickly walking through how this has been a catalyst, but we'd love to hear from you and what questions you have, and if this has sparked any ideas or thoughts and how you might use this information in the future. Okay.
I'm sorry, I might have missed this when you were first presenting, but what is the process for keeping the data updated?
Oh, you didn't miss it. There is not a process. So
Okay.
the data are already, a year old. I guess the process would be to ask Ascendium to, give us another grant to update it.
Yeah, we should give credit to the Applied Population Lab also on our campus, who so they are on the UW-Madison campus, and they did this work for us. And that's what the process would be, is getting additional funding to work with some partners. Well, first of all, to do the research to ensure the data is correct, and then have our partners update it.
I'm very curious if we could maybe talk about rural definitions and whether anybody here bought our definition. And I'll remind what the definition is, because I don't think I was super clear on it, but like, we're using county RUC codes, the rural urban continuum codes. Those have 9 categories. If the category is town or rural, then we said it's rural. If it's urban, then it's not. So we did the sort of, just on or off, rural or not, but we didn't like that. So we wanted to do like the percentage of the commuting zone that lived in rural places as a way to kind of say there are some places that are probably more rural dominant than others. But at the end of the day, we're using counties as a measure of rurality. And we all know that even within a county, there's a lot of variation. So we're missing, we're missing some of that detail. So I'm just very curious of any reactions, positive or negative there.
I mean, on one hand, like, yes, so there's Penobscot County here in Maine. I'm Drew, I'm from Colby College. Here in Maine, there's the county that Bangor, Maine is in. Bangor is a metro area, right? So that's not rural, but that is the same county that will also contain Baxter State Park, which is one of the most like largest wilderness areas in all of the Northeast. And so it's like, yes, the county's not always the best metric of that because there can be such massive shifts within it. But I'm also not certain, just from like a data perspective, like that, like the data exists in a way that like you can ignore counties and do something else, right? So like, yes, it's there would ideally be something better, but I'm not convinced that that better thing actually exists.
Thanks.
And
Drew.
Maine
That
is a very rural state. So in your work, do you ever deal with this, with having to define rurality for data purposes?
It is very challenging. So we'll have a student that's in, for example, a town of 400 or 500 people, but they live, 45 minutes away from Bangor or from Lewiston or something like that. But because the RUCA code is such that they live within a commuting distance of that metro center, that they're not considered rural, even though they are, in this very small area. We also encounter in Maine, we have this weird system of like public-private schools where public school students attend private schools. There was a recent Supreme Court case about it, so it's a very weird, zany system. So where you'll have like a student going to a non-rural school who is from a rural area, and so it's like, how do you make sure that you're accounting for all of that? Because some students might go an hour to their school because that's the only option they have. Their town doesn't offer a high school, so when they go to high school, they go to high school in Bangor, even though it's an hour away. So it is very tricky. In our admissions process, I have other people in my office always coming to me and saying, well, why isn't this student rural? And like, they live here, and like, why aren't they considered rural? And I have to sit there and be like, that's the data that we have to work with. And it doesn't help that a lot of the RUCA data is from the 2010 census. So that kind of can cause some hard feelings. But I have to say, I'm sorry, the student lives too close to Lewiston. Like, they're still in this like metro commuting area. So it makes it hard. I get a lot of grief. But I think we're starting to figure out like that balance and trying to find that, but I don't think we're entirely there yet.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. When I was looking, doing some research on dual enrollment outcomes for rural students using a large NCES data set. And the categories they have is the rural, town, city, and suburb. But town is classified as a population center from 2,500 to 50,000 people. So it was sort of a challenging, I put rural and town together, but I had kind of the opposite issue that where I live up in far Northern California, I live in Siskiyou County, which is this geographically vast, sparsely populated county. And most of our towns are right around 3,000 people, 3,000, 3,500. So most of our schools are classified as town schools and not rural schools, even though the nearest city is over an hour away, and we're, kind of out by ourselves. So it's that, I think it's that the combination of population and proximity is such a complex, like multi-dimensional, I don't know, octopus, that it's really hard to sort all that stuff out. And I do wish that they would change that. I mean, 2,500 to 50,000 is just a ridiculous range for a categorization, it feels to me.
Bonniejean, I wasn't sure if you're going to respond.
Nope.
Thank you for sharing that, because this whole idea of transportation and the transportation costs, not just the financial cost, but the time, are just so fundamental and so huge. And I think this could have implications on how we calculate cost of attendance for schools, or for students who are from rural places, maybe they should have adjustments. Maybe there should be extra aid available, like all sort of implications on that front, but also kind of like, I don't know, coaching applicants on how to talk about that in their application for college. Like that's a really big commitment and responsibility, and pardon me, and probably tells something about the student if they're overcoming those sort of time constraints and other barriers that you're talking about, Alana. So that's a great example. Thanks for sharing.
I think the consideration for additional funding specifically for schools is something that would really be in greater need within rural communities, because in many of our urban situations it's a larger tax basis, and so they receive additional funding or additional compensation from the state, whereas in our rural environments many of those also are like second home or vacation home areas in a lot of cases. Like in Western North Carolina, it's all mountains and lakes, and so people don't live there full time and therefore don't contribute necessarily to the economy. And therefore, the people who do live there do contribute to the economy and attend school on a weekly basis. They receive far less, and that translates to their ADMs, the upkeep, and everything else, the facilities. And even though they're still one of the larger in terms of employers for the county, it's a continued struggle across the board, financially speaking. That's why, like, my organization tries to focus on grants that address the rurality of it, as well as providing additional funding to help support those schools.
Is it Doug?
Yes.
What's your organization?
I work with Appalachian State University. It's in Boone, North Carolina, but we have partnerships with 7 different community colleges and other 4-year institutions, as well as a Gear Up grant with 10 school districts right now. And we have about 3 other grants that help support up to 26 counties in Western North Carolina.
That's awesome. Well, I hope this tool could help in your grant proposals, at the very least. But I think that your point is really spot on. And I think, was it Drew in Maine, maybe a similar point about just the types of rural places, a rural retirement place, a rural natural resource place, and a rural manufacturing place. And I think USDA classifies rurals by their primary their primary occupation groups or something. So there's something here that might be interesting academically, but also like practically. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting you said that, because we do some demographic and post-secondary pathway research in terms of like what are the jobs or careers or opportunities within our rural communities, and we consistently find right now it's healthcare and the school systems are the largest employers. And many of the businesses and opportunities are not like your standard corporate or conglomerates. It's many local hometown entrepreneurs who have started a business and have a small business that they manage and operate.
Forgive me, can I riff on this for a second more? Because that is such an interesting point that I think everybody's going to find interesting. There's this economist at MIT, his name is David Otter, and he's gone through census data over the past 5 or 6 decades. And basically what he's finding is not super surprising, but he's like, well, people used to move to cities and then move back to their hometowns, move back to rural places. It's not happening anymore. It's like, yeah, we've seen those stories. But what's interesting is his argument that I think is new and I think relevant to what you just said, Doug, is that his argument is like, if you're not going to have a lot of formal post-secondary training, it's better that you stay in a rural place, because if you don't have formal post-secondary training and you go to a city, you definitely won't be able to live there affordably. At least if you're in a rural place, you can get more job opportunities, largely around aging services and social services. Like Doug, you just nailed it. I mean, I don't know, I'm speaking to the choir, but I just think it's really interesting where the data and reality kind of line up that way, and unconventionally, like actually people could be better off in rural places if they don't go to college than if they move to a city. And
it's interesting you say that, Nicholas, because that's something that over the past, we've had these Gear Up grants for 10 years now that we've been operating within Western North Carolina. And that's the thing that we've transitioned away from. While the federal government does encourage us to focus on post-secondary options like a 4-year institution, we've learned it's just not a reality for many of our folks. And so we have begun to focus more on post-secondary pathways, meaning that what is the right path for you, whether that's a community college, like what you've kind of alluded to earlier, that this is what represents rural communities, that's their main opportunity in many cases, because they can't transport or get to the 4-year institutions, or they may not afford or see the value in that. Or if it's work, that is your life after, you know, high school, then what is the best opportunity that we can help you prepare for in that post-secondary endeavor?
That's a great point, Doug. And what I was also thinking is, I guess for context, so I am in the state of Michigan. I work at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which, you know, I was just in Detroit this morning, 35-minute drive from the city of Detroit. But I have a scholarship program that is for students who are from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, or the UP, which is a very remote area of our state. And when I talk with my students, I feel like I hear two different narratives from them. One is, I loved growing up there and I'm here to get a degree so that I can go back home and do X, right? Like, there are no dentists in my hometown and I feel so passionate about going back to be a dentist in underserved communities. So like, I'm here to get my dentist degree and I'm going right back. And they're like super focused. And then I have other students that are like, you know what? I liked growing up there. It gave me some good skills. I don't want to go back, and that's fine. And that's their choice. And I guess the third group of students is like, I love it, but I don't know what to do if I go back. Like, I don't know what jobs are there. And so our program, when I'm recruiting with students and I'm there in the UP, we try to like flip our language to be about the value proposition of like, how can getting a college degree enable you to go back to your hometown and continue to help like your home community thrive and grow and move forward into the next, you know, century. And so that's what I talk with my students a lot about, is just like college and this opportunity that they have to come down to Ann Arbor is not necessarily like pulling them away forever, but it's giving them the tools that they need to go back and do what they want there. So I feel like that's just something I try to think about all the time, and this data helps me remember that too.
Megan, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That was one of the things I was going to say as you were talking about return to place. It's so important that those who have influence are not creating that narrative of, oh, you got out. Like, you got out, now you're here and you can go on. Because, well, for so many reasons. But a practical reason is that, for example, the teacher pledge with students who are coming from all over Wisconsin. There are a lot of teacher education students who come to UW-Madison, and then to provide them the opportunity or incentive to go back to their hometown in Wisconsin and be a teacher is critical for public education or K-12 education in the state of Wisconsin, because we need teachers. And so being able to provide space for students to know that and understand that there's value in going back, if they've heard the whole time, like their whole life, they've heard you need to get a degree to get out, like to shift the narrative or offer alternatives. I've heard here this week at ACPA, I've attended a lot of sessions on Indigenous students and rurality, and there's something, you know, for a lot of Indigenous students who are coming from reservations, that their intention, they really want to go back. They want to go to school, get a degree in teaching, get a degree in healthcare, something, and return to their home and their community. And that's their intention of going to school, for their community. And if they run up against a counter narrative when they first get to school, that's harmful. And so to be able to be open, I think is really important. And then I just want to circle back on something Alana said with those numbers, the 2,500 to 50,000, how that's huge, but also how often are communities dipping below the 50,000 and then bouncing back up above the 50,000, and same with the 2,500. Even like they're shifting populations in some of these areas, right? And sometimes they're big shifts and big swings, but the culture or the environment that has been shaped by that past population is still there. Just because you have some more people doesn't mean like you're not experiencing the same sort of life or style in that area. So that just speaks to how we have to be really careful and cognizant around how we define rurality. I see there have been some chats coming in also. Nick, have you been keeping track? Do you want to?
Just helpful resources and reflections. This is great.
Yeah, I also really like what Doug shared about even if students don't return immediately after undergrad, it doesn't mean that's not in their long-term life plan, because I feel like I hear that from my students all the time too. And we sometimes get pressure from different like agencies that we report to and our donors of like what percentage of students are going home, what percentage of students are returning. And it's just so difficult to track that because so many students don't plan to go back at 22, 21, but they do plan to within the next 5 to 10 years. And so I just try to keep that in mind too. It's a great point.
On the college side, that's something I definitely think about when we're telling narratives to students. Our career services, at least at Barnard, a great job of tracking students and where they're going, what kinds of internships they have. And I think that it's really easy for folks to recite, some sort of foundation funding them to go and do something, but really highlighting students who go back to their hometowns or go to another rural and remote area, I think makes a really big impact for these rural and small town students, just to know that you can do that. You can go to, for Barnard, we're in New York City, so you can go to New York and then you can go back to a place that maybe feels more familiar to you.
And
A lot of
just to
this makes
lift
me
up
think of,
Alana's oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just thinking a lot of the context around going back, and then I think about my own experience. I'm out in Oregon. I'm with the Ford Family Foundation and Rural Serving Foundation out here in Oregon. And I'm from Coos Bay, which is on the South Coast. And it would be challenging. I think I could do it, but it'd be challenging for me to actually buy a house in my hometown. And that's Oregon across the board. And just the cost of housing is pricing out folks at quite a clip. And I saw that. I used to work in universities and community colleges in different part of the state in Klamath County. And so shout out to Alana, Zitske County, like just across the border over there. And I saw that time and time again in multiple pockets, students being able to even afford living in rural, low housing options, less than 1% vacancy rate. And then I saw that even on the recruitment side of like work serving in leadership, trying to hire folks to come work at the institutions is a challenge. And so I just wanted to put that comment out there that, gosh, if anyone's got a magic wand for how we fix the housing crisis in a lot of our states. And I also wonder, like, if that's economic data that is also in like the mapping rural colleges or like opportunities to drill down into that even further. So that was just some thoughts I had in a wonderful narrative. Yeah, someday I'd love to retire back in my hometown. Be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love that. I think this tool, I hope can help offer, that nice balance of the narrative and the stories and and the big picture of like, hey, this is, not just unique to us.
Yeah, that one thing that brings up for me, Zach, is I had posted a comment about I'm seeing here in Mount Shasta, it seems like more and more people coming up from the Bay Area post-COVID, where there's more remote work opportunities. And I sort of wonder how this new, more virtual world is going to affect this calculation post-COVID, both with what kind of opportunities are available for students, who go to college working in Siskiyou County. And then, but also to your point, what that's doing to housing costs when people are now moving up from the Bay Area where housing costs are a lot more and they sell their house there and can buy 5 houses in Siskiyou County. And then they can work remotely. That's, there's a lot, it'll be interesting to see over time how that influences, how things play out in rural areas.
Yeah, and it's systems wide working in federal TRIO grants. And they have low income levels, and the low income levels that the federal government puts out for state by state are not reflective of the reality. And so there are students that we couldn't even serve because they don't meet the federal definition of low income, even though they are absolutely low income as we define it living in rural places. So it's a challenge.
There's another comment, and I don't think we have the answer. It was actually a question, but about how online courses are affecting this. And that's a great question, because if an institution offers online education, we have no way of knowing the locations in which that would be like a person's home all over the country, right? And that isn't reflected on this map. Being respectful of everyone's time, we have 1 minute. Oh, we have no minutes left. But I'm not sure if there's a way to continue well, there is a way to continue the conversation through our email. Our email is included on this PowerPoint presentation, which I think we may be able to provide to you. I think Virginia has a PDF of it. So please feel free to reach out to either Nick or me at any time with thoughts, feedback, critical feedback. If you look and you see something that's blaringly wrong, please let us know. And we are able to do those little individual updates whenever we come across the need. So please do that. Nick, do you have any final words?
No, thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much.
So thanks everyone for joining. I will send out the link to the slides as well as the reports and the mapping tool that were shared. And our next SIG event will be happening in May, sponsored with the Common App on the initiatives the Common App is doing to make college more accessible and accessible. So I'll be sending out details on that. But thanks everyone for joining and have a great day.